Good evening. I'm Joseph Dobrian. Tonight we are going to discuss the story behind one of the most famous sports photographs ever. I'm talking about this one. This is a photo of the second match between Muhammad Ali and Ali-Liston, which took place in May of 1965. And as you see, it shows Muhammad Ali standing over a prostrate Ali-Liston, having knocked him down and eventually knocked him out in the first round of that fight. Now, this is deservedly an iconic photograph. It appeared first in Sports Illustrated magazine and has been used over and over by many other people and publications since then. But I'd like to talk a little about how this photograph came to be taken and what was the story behind it. Let's go back to the early 1960s. Even if you don't remember that far back, it was a fascinating time, and it was an especially fascinating time for boxing, because boxing was in big trouble. Professional boxing was in terrible trouble at that time. Boxing in America reached its peak in terms of popularity in the 1930s during the Depression. And then after World War II, it started losing some appeal, partly because young men were coming out of the Army and the Navy, and they were finding jobs, real paying jobs. They did not have to scramble the way really poor kids had to in the 1920s and 30s. So there just weren't enough guys who were desperate enough to become professional boxers. For another thing, television was revolutionizing boxing. Boxing on TV was very, very popular, and as a result, small local fight clubs were closing down because there just wasn't enough business to keep them going. Why would you go and buy a ticket to watch boxing at your local fight club if you could see a better fight on TV for free? So boxing, starting in the 1950s, started to decline. And by the 1960s, this decline was palpable. Moreover, the heavyweight division in particular was in trouble. Now, the heavyweight champion of the world is either the toughest man in the world or he's not, but there is a very real possibility that he is. And he is, whether he likes it or not, boxing's unofficial goodwill ambassador to the rest of the world. Consequently, the heavyweight champion of the world has always been sort of pressured by the other forces in the boxing world to live up to his title, to be a clean-cut, likable guy who can present a good face to the populace. And up through the 1950s and early 1960s, that was always the case. You had Joe Louis in the 1930s and 40s, who was just a byword for sportsmanship and good conduct. Then the men who succeeded him as heavyweight champion, Ezzard Charles, Jersey Joe Walcott, Rocky Marciano, Floyd Patterson, Ingemar Johansson, they were all in pretty much the same mold. They were likable, clean-cut, sportsman-like guys, and they presented a very positive face to the general public. Now, in the early 1960s, Floyd Patterson, who was a very soft-spoken, very respectable young man, was the heavyweight champion of the world. And his number one challenger was a fellow named Ali-Liston. His real name was Charles Liston, but he was known as Sonny. And Sonny was bad news in the eyes of a lot of people in the boxing world. He was a former convict. He was a very tough, rugged guy, not very likable. He acted like a thug. And a lot of people were advising Patterson, do not defend your title against this guy because we do not want a man like this to be heavyweight champion of the world. Moreover, Liston was mobbed up, as they say. That is, he was managed by mobsters. And Patterson's manager was very sensitive about the involvement of the mob in boxing. He did not want his boy, Floyd Patterson, to lose his title to a guy who was managed by mobsters. So there was considerable pressure on Floyd Patterson to avoid defending his title against Liston. On the other hand, quite a few people in the boxing world were saying, look, Floyd, this guy is the logical contender, and you've got to fight him. Just as a matter of honor, you've got to fight him. He might not be a nice guy, but he deserves a shot at the title. And Patterson finally agreed. He said, I have got to fight Liston. I've got to give him a fair chance, like him or not. So in 1962, September of 1962, Patterson went into the ring against Sonny Liston and predictably got beaten. He got knocked out in the first round, comprehensively whipped. So now Sonny Liston, this very unpopular, unlikable fellow, was the heavyweight champion of the world. Now Liston, to give him credit, tried to live up to his title. He tried to be a good ambassador from boxing to the rest of the world. But the press wouldn't give him a chance, and he was not by any means a perfect man. He didn't quite know how to do it. He didn't quite know how to be an ambassador. He was not a well-spoken man. He was shy. He knew that he was not the brightest bulb in the circuit. So he was at several disadvantages, and he was never a popular champion at all. Well, by early 1964, the logical contender for Liston's title was a young fellow from Louisville, Kentucky, known as Cassius Clay. He had been an Olympic champion in the 1960 Olympics in Rome, and now he was contending for the heavyweight championship. And he was a loudmouth. He was known as the Louisville Lip because he was such a noisy, obnoxious guy. That was his shtick. He drew attention to himself by braggadocio, by talking about how he was the greatest of all time and how he was going to whip Sonny Liston. He called Liston the big ugly bear and said he was going to create a total eclipse of the Sonny. Well, Liston finally agreed to meet Ali, as he later called himself. He was actually Cassius Clay at that time, still called himself Cassius Clay. And they agreed to meet in the Miami Convention Center in Miami, Florida in 1964. Nobody thought that Liston could lose this fight. He was a terrifying fighter. He had enormous fists. He had a huge punch. He had an intimidating scowl. And nobody knew much about Cassius Clay. They knew he was fast, and they knew he had a big mouth. But nobody really thought he was a substantial fighter. He had shown certain weaknesses. He carried his left hand too low, and of course, if you carry your hands too low against a guy like Liston, you're going to get your head knocked off. The consensus a few weeks up to the fight was that Liston was a 7-1 favorite, which in the world of boxing is that's pretty high odds. But here's what people didn't think about. Liston had hardly fought in the previous several years. In 1961, I think he fought one fighter. He fought one round, knocked the guy out in the first round. Then the following year, he fought one round against Patterson. In 1963, he had a rematch with Patterson and again fought only one round. So he was very, very out of practice. Plus, he was getting old. He was, well, it was never quite certain what Liston's age was, but he was certainly well past 30. And for a boxer, that is old. Moreover, Liston was not taking Clay seriously. He said, I'll knock him out in 2 rounds. It'll take me 1 round to catch him and a 2nd round to knock him out. So he was not training for a long fight. He thought he had no problem, nothing to worry about. And his suspicion was confirmed on the morning of the fight at the weigh-in when Clay started acting like a crazy man, screaming at Liston, telling him he was going to take Liston down. He had to be held back by his seconds as though he was going to jump at Liston right there. Liston didn't quite know what to make of this. Everybody thought, well, most people at any rate, thought that Clay was simply scared out of his wits, and that's why he was acting so crazy. By the time of the fight that night, the odds had climbed to 10-1 on Liston. Nobody thought Clay had any chance at all. But Clay's manager, Angelo Dundee, told him before the fight, when you get to the center of the ring to shake hands before the fight, stand as tall as you can. Liston does not realize how much taller you are, how much bigger you are than he is. So Liston and Clay come out to the center of the ring, as is customary before a fight. Bell hasn't rung yet. They're still wearing their robes and all that. They come to the center of the ring to get their final instructions from the referee and to shake hands. And at this point, Clay is standing there. He's standing as tall as he can. He's 6'3". Liston is about 6'1". Liston didn't realize this guy is taller than I am. And Clay looks down at him and says, "You've been tricked, chump. I got you now, chump. I got you now." And Liston is, whoa, what's happening here? He's taken aback. He's not quite sure what's going to happen now. He's probably saying to himself, could I be in trouble here? Now, just about all boxing matches are decided before the first bell rings. Very rarely do you see a fight in which both men believe they're going to win. This may have been, at first, one of those rare cases where both men think they're going to win. But I think that Liston was beginning to doubt himself by the time the opening bell rang. Well, they got back to their corners, the two of them, after having shaken hands. They take their robes off. The ring is cleared except for the two gladiators and the referee. And the bell rings for the start of the first round. The first round is actually pretty much as people predicted it would be. Clay is much faster than Liston. He dances around the ring. He outboxes Liston. It looks like maybe he actually had slightly the better of that round. And that doesn't surprise too many people at ringside. They figured probably Clay would start out fast. And he is a very, very fast boxer. He's got a good jab. So it's not terribly surprising that he won the first round. And even at that, it was close. Second round? The second round, Liston looks a little better. Liston is a little more aggressive. He starts landing a few punches. Liston has got one hell of a left jab. That's his best punch, his left jab. And he lands it on Clay, but Clay is being very clever. He is circling to his left, that is, towards Liston's right hand and away from that left jab of Liston. So Liston can't land that left jab solidly. Now, Liston has a decent right hand, but he has to use the left jab to set it up. He can't just throw the right independently. So that second round is a little bit confusing. It looks like maybe Liston had the better of it, just slightly. But it's still anybody's fight after 2 rounds, and this already surprises a few people because a lot of people didn't think that Clay was going to be on his feet after the second round. But he is. And in the third round, Clay starts really finding his range, finding his stride. He starts popping Liston with that left jab, and Liston is starting to miss. Liston is not as fast as Clay. And already, it's only the third round, already Liston is starting to feel a little bit tired because he was not training for a long fight. Plus, by being repeatedly hit with the jab, his left eye is starting to puff up. Liston's left eye is starting to puff up a little bit, actually rather seriously. And late in the third round, the skin under his left eye splits open, and blood starts running down. Liston is badly cut. If you get cut around the eyes in boxing, It's no joke. If you get cut under the eye, it's not going to interfere with your vision much. But if you start puffing up, that eye is going to close and it's going to hamper your vision. So now, after 3 rounds, all of a sudden, Sonny Liston is in some trouble. It still can't be certain that he's going to lose the fight, but he certainly did lose that 3rd round, and now he's got a bad cut under his left eye. Well, his cornermen are a little worried about this, and it has never been proven, but it is widely believed that they doctored Liston's gloves between the 3rd and the 4th round, because the 4th round was fairly even. Maybe Liston had a little the better of it. Maybe Clay did. Nobody could be quite sure. But what cannot be denied is that toward the end of the 4th round, Clay started blinking. He couldn't see. He was rubbing his eye. Obviously, he had something in his eyes. What is generally believed is that Liston's cornermen put some sort of caustic solution on his gloves so that when he hit Ali in the face, it would get into Ali's eyes and blind him. Sure enough, at the end of the 4th round, Clay comes back to his corner and he says to his manager, Angelo Dundee, he says, "Cut the gloves off me, I'm blind." Dundee is not going to panic, though. He takes his tip of his finger and sticks it in Clay's eye, and then like that, he says, "Oh my God, it burns. There is something in there." So he takes the sponge that he uses to sponge Clay down in between rounds, and he passes it over his own eyes first to show everybody that there is nothing suspicious on that sponge. Then he washes Clay's eyes out with that sponge. Clay still can't see anything. He's still saying he wants to quit. Dundee says to him, "This is for the big one, Daddy. Get out there and run till it clears up." And he has to practically physically lift Clay off of his stool and whack him on the ass to get him out there for the 5th round. The bell rings for the 5th round, and Clay is not moving. The referee, Barney Felix, says, "Damn it, Clay, get out here." Dundee gives him a little push, and Clay is out there for the 5th round. And he spends that 5th round running, really trying to stay away from Liston and sort of feeling his way around. When Liston tries to throw a punch, Clay will just put his hand out there, as much as to say, "I'm blind, don't hit me." And Liston tries to hit him, but Clay is totally on the defensive. And if your opponent is completely on the defensive, it's going to be hard to hit him. Well, Liston won that round all right, because Clay wasn't doing much. He was blind for most of it. But by the end of that round, Clay's vision has cleared up, and he's fighting back, and he's looking pretty good. And now it's the 6th round, and Liston has had it. Liston is worn out. He's got nothing left. And Clay comes out for that 6th round and starts beating Liston up, just hammering away at his face, ripping his face to shreds. And people at ringside are saying, "Oh my God, the title is going to change hands. This kid is going to win." Nobody could believe it, but there it was right then and there. Well, the 6th round ends. Liston is clearly very tired and very frustrated. And he goes back to his corner, he sits down at his stool and says, "That's it." And his cornermen think he means, "That's it, I'm really going to get to work now." So they start preparing him for the 7th round, and Liston says, "No, that's it." And he spits his mouthpiece out. And he quits right there. He's just not going to go on. Well, Clay, over the opposite end of the ring, is the first one to see what's going on. He looks over at Liston's corner and he sees Liston spitting his mouthpiece out, and he realizes what has happened. Liston has just quit, and he is now the heavyweight champion of the world. He gets up out of his stool and he does a little dance, and he starts yelling at the reporters at ringside, "Eat your words, eat your words." Well, Liston got a lot of criticism for quitting like that, for just giving up his championship when he wasn't really in bad trouble. Yeah, he was losing the fight, he was getting beaten up, but he wasn't helpless, he was not in bad trouble. And if you're the heavyweight champion of the world, you don't give up your title like that, sitting on your stool, unless you are really comprehensively whipped. But look at it this way. Liston was shot. He was in bad trouble. He knew by this time he couldn't win the fight. He knew by this time that he was going to get knocked out, probably in the next round, and that it was going to hurt. So you can understand why he did it. You might not praise him for quitting like that, but that's what he chose to do. He claimed afterwards that he had injured his shoulder in the course of the fight, and he was fighting one-armed, and you couldn't fight one-armed against Clay, and that was why he quit. People are suspicious about that. It may have been true, it may not, but he quit. Cassius Clay is now the heavyweight champion of the world. Nobody likes him much more than they liked Liston because of his loud mouth. Plus, a few days after the fight, he announces that he has joined the Nation of Islam, and he will no longer be called Cassius Clay. He is now Muhammad Ali. Well, nobody in the boxing world took kindly to Cassius Clay changing his name to Muhammad Ali and joining the Nation of Islam. That pissed an awful lot of people off, and his popularity was zero. So now there is talk of a rematch between Ali and Liston. And now Liston, who was generally despised by the boxing world for being such a thug, is now their champion. He's their fair-haired boy. He's the guy they want to come back and regain his title and keep this black Muslim from it. Well, due to one thing and another, the rematch doesn't happen for more than a year. It doesn't happen until May of 1965, and it takes place in a venue in Lewiston, Maine. The promotion of this fight just went down the toilet. They couldn't find a suitable venue for it. It ended up taking place in this crummy arena in a small town in Maine with maybe 5,000 people in the audience. It was just a complete MCF, basically, the promotion of the fight and the way it was set up. Plus, there were rumors all along that there was something smelly about this fight, that it was fixed somehow. Some people said Ali has been intimidated into taking a dive. Liston will win the fight because Ali will throw it. Other people said, no, Liston's going to throw the fight because he's afraid that the black Muslims will assassinate him if he wins. In any event, there was a very, very bad smell about this fight going in. One reason it was so poorly attended was that a lot of people believed that this fight was not going to be on the level. There was going to be involvement by the mob, by the black Muslims, and it was just going to end in suspicious circumstances. Everybody was pretty certain of that. Well, the fight went on to a very small crowd. Robert Goulet sang the national anthem and forgot the lyrics, butchered the song. That's what most people remember about that fight, was Robert Goulet messing up the Star-Spangled Banner. Well, Angelo Dundee, Clay's manager, said to him, or Ali's manager, I should say by now, he said to Ali, when the first bell rings, you go out there, and the first thing you do, you hit him with a big right hand. Bring back memories. That's what happened. The bell rang for the opening round. Ali came out there and immediately led with his right hand, which is unconventional, but he just came out there and whacked Liston a good one with the right hand, reminding Liston of how well he could punch. Well, for the first minute or so of the round after that initial blow, not much happened. It looked like the two men were sort of feeling each other out, and the fight would probably go a few rounds. Liston looked like he was in much better shape for this fight than he had been for the second one. So people thought this might be a competitive fight after all. Then, after a little more than a minute of the first round, Liston started forcing Ali back into the ropes, and he moved in on Ali, and just as he did, Ali had his back to the ropes, Liston was coming in, and Ali threw what he called an anchor punch, sort of a hammering punch with his right hand. It didn't look like a very hard punch, but it caught Liston off balance, and Liston went down. And then this happened, this picture. This is not Ali doing a victory dance over Liston. No, he's saying, nobody is going to believe this, chump, get up. See, he thought Liston was taking a dive. And maybe Liston was taking a dive, because that did not look like a punch that was strong enough to crush a grape. On the other hand, it has happened that a fighter will be off balance and will go down because of a very light punch that just caught him at the right moment. Liston himself, after the fight, said that that was what happened, that he was just off balance, that he didn't see the punch coming, and went down. And I believe it. I've seen films of that fight more times than I can count. It was a genuine punch. It was not a terribly hard punch, but it was a real punch. Liston was off balance. The punch actually lifted him off of his feet. He wasn't faking going down. He was genuinely knocked down. However, he could have gotten up. Liston claimed that he didn't get up because Ali was standing over him the whole time, and he was afraid that he would be hit as he was getting up. But that doesn't quite wash, because finally Ali went to a neutral corner. And Liston then could have gotten up, and he finally did. And they started fighting again, but then the referee pulled them apart and said, no, sorry, you've been down for 10 seconds, the fight's over. Nobody quite understood what was going on at the time. The referee had lost control of the fight. Liston had been down for more than 10 seconds, but the referee had never started counting over him. So officially, he probably should not have been ruled out at that point. On the other hand, Dundee in his later years said, I went over to Liston after the fight to shake his hand, and he was out. You could tell he was very out of it. He had been hit badly. And one of Liston's seconds said that after the fight, when they were in the dressing room, Liston asked for smelling salts, and he said, smelling salts is nasty. You don't ask for smelling salts if you don't need them. He was hit. So we will never know the true story about that fight. Probably, in my opinion, Liston knew that it was not in his best interest to win that fight. Some people say that his wife was being held hostage to make sure that he did what he was supposed to do. Others say that he was just afraid that he would be assassinated. Others said that he was paid to take a dive. But in any event, while he was genuinely knocked down, I believe that he could have gotten up, should have gotten up, and just took advantage of the situation to stay down and lose the fight. But that is the story of how this iconic photograph came to be. Liston lying on the floor after a doubtful knockdown, Ali not believing that the situation was genuine, screaming at Liston to get up because nobody is going to believe this. Ali was frustrated because he thought that the fix was in also, and he did not want to win that way. So it was, all in all, just about the most controversial heavyweight championship fight of all time. And of course, what happened to Ali in the years after that, and what happened to Liston for that matter in the years after that, those are two different stories and well worth knowing about. But we don't have time to get into them tonight. So thank you very much for listening, and I will be back probably with another one of these lectures before too long. Good night.